Hello tea friends. We thought we'd make a little video introducing this year's Shou Puerh because it's kind of exciting and experimental. We ourselves weren't exactly sure how it was going to turn out, if it was going to be wonderful or kind of so-so. It turned out really good, so we're super stoked. This is actually learning opportunities as well with this year's show. We have two of them, but they're actually both the same tea, sort of. We'll get into that in a minute. I don't know how often this is being done nowadays. It's certainly a modern innovation, a modern experimentation. This is one of the only examples I've ever seen. But amazingly, both of our Shou Puerhs this year are purple teas. Now, most purple tea in Yunnan is reserved to make either Dien Hong, which is Yunnanese red. Dien is the Aboriginal word for Yunnan, and Hong is red. So Yunnanese red tea, or Shou Puerh. It's very rare to see it piled into Shou Puerh. And this wild purple bud puerh tea really suits red tea better, really suits Dien Hong because it's sweet and often fruity and very fragrant. And so it lends itself to red tea. It lends itself to red tea processing. You could say it wants to be processed like a red tea. And so it's rare to see it processed even as a sheng, let alone a shou. And so it's really a special opportunity to be able to taste some purple bud Shou Puerh. Now, purple bud tea is called purple bud tea because the buds are purple. Usually they turn green as the leaf flushes and opens up. This is caused by a pigment in the tea. These pigments are called anthocyanins, and they're what make grapes and maple leaves also the color that they are. Originally, these pigments arise to protect a plant from UV. So high concentrations of UV and the plant will develop these pigments to protect itself. But they can also be transmitted genetically. So even if the tree's descendants eventually move to a place where the UV is different than the origin, they can still maintain the ability to mutate into purple bud. And this is common all throughout all types of tea. In fact, here in Taiwan, one of the daughters of Taiwan, one of the varietals that's born here, Sijichun, often has purple buds. In Wui, Tailohan often has purple buds. And many varietals can have purple buds in Yunnan. It happens in many places. This tea comes from Puerh Prefecture, from wild purple bud trees. And then it was picked and aged a little bit and then piled. So this is really a unique tea, mostly because of the wild purple bud trees, and then processed as a shou. We really weren't sure how it was going to turn out, but it actually turned out really amazing. Now, this tea was piled a little heavier. To ferment Shou Puerh tea, it's basically composted. It's put in piles, sprayed with water, covered with a thermal blanket, and then stirred. Typically, around here, we tend to like our tea a little bit more lightly fermented. We call that artificial fermentation. It's not artificial in the sense that it's happening in some strange way. It's artificial in the sense that it's induced by humans. And the only reason we use the word artificial is to contrast shou to sheng, which ferments naturally over time. So because to contrast those two types of fermentation, we call the piling, the forced fermentation of Shou Puerh, artificial fermentation, and the aging, natural fermentation. So that artificial fermentation, we usually like it lighter, in part because then it allows for some natural fermentation. It allows the shou to age, in a sense. And it also maintains some of the depth and breadth of the natural tea leaves. In this case, it was piled a little heavier. Now, what happens when a tea is piled more heavily is that the heat and the moisture at the bottom of the pile causes some of the tea leaves to constrict into really, really tight balls that are called chatou. And these chatou, traditionally, they were either thrown out, they were drunk, they were taken home and drunk by factory workers, or sometimes they were used to inseminate future batches of the same tea. One of the advantages that tea producers had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is that they had a very stable supply of this same tea leaves each year. Of course, no tea leaves are the same each year. The weather changes and the nature and the cosmos all change as well. And so the minerals that the tree takes in, the sun, the weather, all produce different leaves. But they were able to get the same leaves from the same gardens each year, and that allowed them to create blends that could be maintained year to year, and that allowed them to then introduce the microbial ecology from the previous year's piling into the next year's, kind of like sourdough bread, passing on its microecology as well. So they were sometimes kept for that purpose and then sometimes drunk. They can actually be really amazing. They're incredibly patient. You can boil them even for hours and they still don't open up. That's how tightly compressed they are from all that heat and moisture down at the bottom of the piles. They tend to be sweet, sweeter than whatever show they come from. They're just a little more yin as a result of being compressed in such a yang way. They're just a little more gentle than their leaf counterpart. So our two beautiful teas this year are both wild purple bud tea from Puerh Prefecture that has been piled a little bit more heavily. You can still age Shou Puerh that's been piled a little bit more heavily, but it doesn't really ferment. It doesn't really change a lot. What it does is mellow out. So there's a piling flavor called Dui Wei. The piling is called Wo Dui and the flavor is called Dui Wei. And that Dui Wei will mellow out. So the piling flavor will mellow out over time and the tea will get smoother and more delicious. So Mandala is the leaf and bud sets. This is the tea version of this wild purple bud Shou Puerh. And this brick we're calling Cosmos is all the chato from the bottom of the pile. We're also selling them as sets because actually, first of all, if you buy both of these as a set, you're really getting 3 teas because you can drink this one, you can drink this one, you can learn about chato and what they taste like, but then you can also blend them in all kinds of wonderful ways, which is especially powerful if you're going to boil this tea, which I highly recommend, which is taking some of this and blending it with just the right amount of this and boiling it, and you're going to get a really magical tea. So we weren't sure how this tea was going to turn out because it just hasn't been done a lot using purple bud tea to make Shou Puerh, but it actually turned out really well. Some of the qualities that make purple bud tea so effective at making red tea, you could say that it wants to be red tea, it wants to be dianhong, mainly because it's fruity, it's crisp, it has a floral bouquet, and it's sweet. Some hints of that made it through the piling. Of course, not anywhere near the extent that would have happened if it had been processed as red tea. Red tea processing brings out those fragrances and that kind of floral fruitiness. So it's not like it has that, it's not like it tastes like a dianhong, but some of that sweetness, some of that fruitiness did make it through into the Shou Puerh. And so you have a Shou Puerh that's really creamy and thick the way that a more heavily piled show is, but also sweet and a little bit more floral than most Shou Puerhs. And it has also really good energy because it's coming from wild purple bud tea. So that some of that energy also made it through. The reason that a lot of wild Mao Cha is kept as sheng is because when you pile the tea, there is certainly a loss in some of the original like forest energy of the sheng, original vibrance of the sheng tea, which is why Shou teas are typically cheaper. They're typically made of leftovers. They're typically made of unintentionally. In other words, they're made of whatever sheng doesn't sell. That's what's blended and piled and made into shou. Our shou is more intentionally produced, and so we're trying to make the best quality that we can. But of course, it will never compare in breadth and scope and energy to a sheng. But some of that wildness did also make it through the piling, and so there is a bit of those qualities, both the sweet fruitiness that lends purple bud tea to red tea and some of the breadth and depth of wild trees that would lend it to sheng have made it through. And so these two cakes blended in various ways are going to bring a lot of enjoyment, a lot of fun, and a lot of learning. You can learn about chato if you've never tasted them, the balls that form at the bottom of the pile. You can learn about purple bud tea, and you can learn about purple bud shou, which most likely you've never tasted because it's really rare. Maybe you have, I don't know, but it's rare enough that most of us have not. And also, I highly recommend blending these two and boiling them. We have cauldrons on our website if you're interested in getting a cauldron to start boiling tea, but I would recommend blending these just right and boiling it. It's really a will be a treat, a wonderful session. If you have the time and space and you can boil these teas for an afternoon, you'll be highly rewarded. They're both really wonderful teas. We're excited. Thank you so much for all your support. All of it is building and building towards the creation of your tea center, Light Meets Life. We're currently looking at land, and hopefully soon we're going to direct all this energy towards it and start building your center and opening courses once again for all of you to come and learn about tea for free.